Russian regions are trembling before Ukrainian drones. Putin disgraced himself so much with his parade that they want him gone. Zelensky outsmarted Putin. Now the Kremlin Giza is talking about peace. The Europeans are starting the negotiation process. Tomahawks will indeed arrive in Ukraine. The United States gives the go-ahead. A rift in the Kremlin. Putin is terrified of a coup d'etat. He's setting new rules. Russians are retreating from the Zaporizhzhia region, while Zekray's tourists in Turkey have started rising from their knees. But there's a catch. Sunday morning news today. I'm Karina Klaishan and we're starting. While a very dismal victory mania reigned in Moscow all day, the regions weren't in the mood for a parade at all. They're worried about their lives.
Why did you put out only one cannon? But the area of Putin's residence is fenced with 20 cannons, so nothing reaches the president. And the people? We are the main source of power, not the president. Presidents come and go, 1, 2, 3. We'll find who we need. There are people among the folk.
Yes, imagine that. It's even getting through to them. Before the parade, Russia was literally ablaze. Ukrainian drones were actively attacking the western regions of the Russian Federation.
Oh my God, mama, mama, mama. Let's go.
One of the successful targets was Rostov Control. This is the regional center of the unified air traffic management system in the Rostov region. Aviation halted all flights. A literal aviation collapse occurred at the airports of the south, which caused enormous economic damage to Russia. But Putin decided it was no big deal because the main thing is that it wasn't on Red Square. But he did talk about the act.
The regime has committed another act. Undoubtedly. Of a terrorist nature.
A powerful retaliatory strike? No, forget it. Although the Ministry of Defense used this to scare people every day. As stated by Viktor Sobolev, a member of the State Duma Defense Committee, they will strike Kyiv only if Kyiv strikes the parade. Once again, not because of strikes on critical facilities, people, or anywhere else, but only if it's on the parade. The terrorist messed his pants but swallowed it. Victory mania in all its glory. If for the entire civilized world, these days are a time of quiet mourning, a reason to reflect on the value of human life and learn the right lessons from history, then in Russia, it's business as usual. They dance on the bones of their own and others' grandfathers and claim a victory for themselves that they have nothing to do with.
Russia has never seen such a disgrace before. What the Kremlin has turned May 9th into.
What is sacred to us?
This year, due to Putin's fear of drone raids, the victory parade has been significantly shortened, and they decided not to bring out any military equipment at all.
It was a symbol, after all. Vladimir Vladimirovich was the one who came up with celebrating it on such a grand scale. And then something went wrong.
There are mobile internet issues in Moscow and St. Petersburg. They've shut everything down. Even whitelisted websites won't open.
A minute of silence is hereby declared.
Fearing the worst, Putin is reinforcing air defenses around Moscow before the May holidays, creating a new defensive ring.
Hurrah.
Nothing like this has ever happened before. The rehearsal itself was postponed for a long time. In the end, it was held at night so that no one would see it. And just in case, the metro remains open during any explosions. There's no point in even talking about victory anymore. They're afraid to walk the streets of their own capital. At least 15 regions of the Russian Federation have announced the complete cancellation of their parades. In Samara, they're dismantling the stands due to the threat of drone attacks. The officials, of course, made money on both the assembly and the disassembly. In Yakutia, they couldn't even raise that famous victory banner. During the ceremony, the flag fell right off the flagpole. They say it's a bad omen. The heroic feat achieved by the soldiers of the anti-Hitler coalition, won in a brutal war at the cost of millions of lives, has turned into victory mania in Russia. Shameful marches have once again swept through the regions. Why shameful? Because it's all just pseudo-grandeur. It's happening against a backdrop of abandoned towns and villages without paved roads or gas. But once a year this happens.
Gone. It is a holiday, a time to pause and celebrate. With gray hair at the temples, a gentle sign of the years that have passed, there is joy, a happiness that fills the heart. Tears in the eyes show the deep emotions that come with remembering, with gratitude, and with hope for what is still to come. Victory Day, Victory Day.
Veterans whom officials only remember once a year are forced to attend schools so that governors can report back to the Kremlin. But people aren't allowed to take to the streets everywhere. The governor of the Kursk region and Kinstein have come up with an updated version of the Immortal Regiment. He says since we can't go out because it's forbidden, let's celebrate differently. Let's use photos of our veteran relatives as profile pictures and stick them to our windows.
Photos of relatives are being displayed in the windows of institutions and various organizations. Well, since maintaining social media accounts is mandatory for officials, I ask that this week, colleagues, you also change your profile pictures to photos of your relatives, war participants, home front workers.
Forward, everyone, march.
And here Sakhalin teachers actually marched in their own Immortal Regiment. Only they carried a portrait in formation, Talankins. This is the creator of that same Oscar-winning film, Mr. Nobody Against Putin, about the brainwashing of Russian school children.
Mark time. Halt, 1-2.
This is a new stunt by Bokhan, a Belarusian performance artist who has already pranked Russian teachers. And they either made tinfoil hats for their heads or were charging water. And in another district center, they staged a concert right on a train. They brought in a couple of anti-aircraft guns, while women in garrison caps cheered on the ground. The Immortal Regiment was cancelled in occupied Crimea, but it was held underwater in the Urals. Divers from Yekaterinburg and Perm decided to show off their patriotism and went down to a depth of 28 meters with portraits. And this exceeded all expectations. It looked so realistic that for a moment it seemed like the fascists had returned to today's Russia, but in a new guise.
No, from the village.
From the village, a party member? Well, give me your hand. Give me your hand.
My hand?
Let's roll them. Yeah, we'll see. We'll figure it out. Speculation in our time?
I'm not guilty.
We have everything. Well, if they're taking fingerprints, then you're guilty. If there are suspicions, the court will sort it out later. The most humane court in the world. Which locks up everyone in a row.
He said it very correctly, the pure truth, and he wasn't afraid. In Russia, there is neither a humane court nor a valiant police force. All security forces work for Putin. But if you think these victory mania parades ended in Russia, well, no. They've spread like aphids across Europe and even across the ocean. They proudly drag themselves around with St. George ribbons, but to their traditionalist motherland, for some reason, they're in no hurry to move back. And even at resorts, they behave abominably.
And let all the Germans, Swedes, I don't know, Poles, everyone who's there, stare. This morning at breakfast, they were staring because I went to breakfast like this. And now I'm walking like this too. I don't care because show them what we're made of, right? They just don't know Russian broads yet.
Meanwhile, in the occupation, they are militarizing Ukrainian children. With the arrival of the Russian world in Ukrainian cities, children have faced harsh propaganda. This is Melitopol. Left, left, 1, 2, 3. Left, left, 1, 2, 3. Left, left, 1, 2, 3. The normal world, as we know it, sees World War II as a bitter and painful lesson, but not Russia.
I don't know how to put it. Maybe Russia is doing something wrong.
And Russian Z-Patriot social media was hit by a wave of criticism. Heated war supporters called Putin a disgrace to Russia and even called for his resignation. They didn't like the truce announcement, nor the chance to bring 1,000 Russian POWs back to their home harbor. The dictator's press secretary Dmitry Peskov also had to blush and dodge questions. A professional liar looking down commented on Zelensky's parade permission like this.
Well, of course, we really don't actually need his permission to go ahead with this, but maybe woe to those who actually try to mock Victory Day, and make such really stupid jokes.
It's their own fault. Russia ignored Kiev's peace initiative for days of silence. Now it's facing a barrage of drone attacks. It's loud, hot, and tense even in Grozny now.
Russians likely never imagined that in the 5th year of the war against Ukraine, they would be celebrating the so-called Victory Day holiday exactly like this.
So we went out for a run, just enjoying ourselves, and then suddenly the drone threat started. Mummy, oh mum, what do we do now?
These are Ukrainian drones that visited the city of Sochi. And here's a resident of Perm enjoying the clear and cloudless sky in the city.
See? Whoops. All of this is smoke, just so you know, it's not clouds. Something went bang over there, basically, behind the houses.
This is the Lukoil Permneftyog Syntez on fire, one of Russia's largest oil refineries. Its capacity is about 13 million tons of oil per year. Ukrainian drones also reached the capital of Chechnya, Grozny. The strike hit a motorized rifle military unit and the FSB building. On the eve of the so-called Victory Day, the entire European part of the Russian Federation was massively attacked.
According to the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation, over a large number of Russian regions, mostly in central Russia, 260 were intercepted, with some number of Ukrainian attack drones.
And this is how guests and residents of Moscow are spending May 9th in the White Stone City's airports, resting on mats for over 20 hours. Due to air raid alerts, all flights have been cancelled.
In Sheremetyevo, as you can see today, it actually appears to be even worse than before.
More than 14,000 people were waiting for their flights. In airports across several regions, more than 80 flights were delayed or cancelled.
To ensure the highest level of safety, all flights are delayed for an indefinite period.
It's been 32 hours and we still can't fly out of Vnukovo.
According to the Russian Ministry of Transport, Ukrainian drones hit the building of the South Russia Air Navigation Branch in Rostov-on-Don. Following this, 13 airports in the region suspended operations.
Operations have been suspended at the airports of Astrakhan, Vladikavkaz, Volgograd, Gelendzhik, Grozny, Krasnodar, Makhachkala, Magas, Mineralnie Vody, Nalchik, Sochi, Stavropol, and Elista. A decision on when flights will resume will be made in the near future, towards the south of the country with a reduced flight frequency.
Russian social media groups report that the AFU strike has effectively crippled aviation logistics in part of the country. And in the future, such strikes could lead to an aviation collapse.
They've begun striking the infrastructure of the State Air Traffic Management Corporation. They are responsible for organizing air traffic. This is, in fact, a very alarming wake-up call. They might try to shut down all of our air traffic this way.
Massive AFU attacks on the Russian Federation are a direct result of recent Russian strikes on Ukraine. Despite the declared truce, Moscow continues shelling Ukrainian cities and received a response. On the eve of the parade, the Kremlin even threatened Kyiv with Oreshnik. Such threats reflect the realization by Russian dictator Vladimir Putin that he cannot reliably protect Moscow and other deep rear areas from Ukrainian strikes.
The Kremlin is trying to prove it can depopulate Kyiv and control the decision-making of Ukraine's partners through threats of war escalation, while Putin tries to mask the weakness exposed by Ukrainian attacks on the deep rear.
There were official warnings that were addressed and communicated by the Ministries of Foreign Affairs of several European Union member states, and as I understand it, by the United States as well, to their diplomatic staff. In other words, this meant that diplomatic personnel, including embassy staff and other officials, were moved or relocated to somewhere considered safe, away from any potential danger. The European Union ambassador in Kyiv stated yesterday that there will be no evacuation of EU embassy personnel from Kyiv at this time. This position, according to the ambassador, remains unchanged.
The effectiveness of Ukrainian strikes is obvious, and everyone in the Russian Federation understands this now.
But no one has been afraid of the Kremlin's threats for a long time.
Tomahawks for Ukraine are back on the agenda. In Europe, it's been proposed to trade US aid for Ukraine for participation in an operation against Iran. The National Interest publication writes that European countries may try to get Washington to supply long-range Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine in exchange for participating in an operation to open the Strait of Hormuz. This refers to the possible involvement of France, Germany, and the United Kingdom in a joint US naval mission against Iran. In return, Europeans could demand tougher support for Kyiv from the White House. It seems the Kremlin's geostrategist underestimated Europe.
The European Union is starting to prepare for possible negotiations with Russia to end the war against Ukraine. This is reported by the Financial Times, citing European officials. In European capitals, frustration is growing with the progress of peace efforts currently led by US President Donald Trump. Against this backdrop, the EU is increasingly discussing its own role in a potential negotiation process.
Well, Ukraine is not our war. We helped, but Ukraine is not our war. They're doing a bad job. Europe is doing a poor job with its tasks in many ways. They talk too much and do nothing. We're talking about Ukraine. They talk, but they don't do anything. And the war just goes on and on.
European Council President Antonio Costa stated that the European Union has the potential for negotiations with Putin. According to him, he is currently holding consultations with the leaders of all 27 EU countries to determine how Europe could organize a dialogue with Moscow if the right moment arises. Costa also said that at the EU summit in Cyprus, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky urged European partners to be ready to make a positive contribution to future negotiations. The Office of the President of Ukraine confirmed the discussion of this topic. At the same time, Brussels admits Moscow is not yet showing readiness for real negotiations. That is why the EU is discussing not only the format of a possible dialogue, but also ways to increase pressure on the Kremlin. Among the options is the appointment of a special EU representative who could speak with Russia on behalf of the entire bloc. This idea was previously supported by Estonian President Alar Karis and Latvian Prime Minister Evika Selina.
The European Union must also participate in these discussions. Although we are not at war with Russia directly, we have been supporting Ukraine for many years. Therefore, we must also have a voice. But as you can see, we are a little late.
However, there is no unified position among EU countries yet. European leaders are arguing about who exactly should represent the Union in negotiations, when such contacts are even possible, and what conditions Europe can offer Moscow. Belgian Prime Minister Bart de Wever has already publicly raised the issue of creating a communication channel with the Kremlin, and the head of European diplomacy, Kaja Kallas, on the contrary states, Europe should not ask Russia for negotiations, but should strive for a situation in which Moscow itself will be forced to move to a real dialogue.
We must not humiliate ourselves by acting as supplicants, saying, please, we beg you to talk to us. But we must put them in such a position that they move from imitation to real negotiations.
Against the backdrop of a protracted war in Europe, there is more and more talk about the need to prepare for various scenarios, including a quick and unexpected end to the war. That is why the EU is already starting to discuss its own strategy for negotiations with the Russian Federation.
Meanwhile, the throne has begun to tremble. Dissatisfaction among the Russian elites with the war, the economy, and censorship is growing by leaps and bounds. But in the Kremlin, instead of trying to at least calm the important and wealthy, all efforts have been thrown into hiding Putin. Because the bunker dweller has a new flare-up. He sees a coup everywhere. Though maybe he's not just seeing things. How close is the split within the Kremlin and what the elites are planning, we will tell you next.
The conflict of elites is escalating in the Kremlin. The camp of opponents of war and censorship is growing. A clash of the Kremlin towers is inevitable.
What is happening is terrible.
This is a short summary of a recent article from the Washington Post. Journalists, citing sources, write that internal contradictions in Russia's ruling circles have intensified to previously unseen proportions.
There is a very obvious conflict between the presidential administration and the second directorate of the FSB. These guys have received a lot of authority and have started to tighten the screws very hard. The presidential administration is trying in some way to let Putin understand that the situation could get out of control.
They aren't attacking each other yet, but they are giving up their pawns to be devoured without a second thought. This, as the publication claims, is very clearly seen in the example of Ilya Remeslo, that same Z propagandist who previously collaborated with the Kremlin and attacked the opposition, but is now criticizing Putin.
The main cause of all the problems that are now in our country is not Kirienko there, not Messenger Max, not the presidential administration, but the person who is at the very top, who manages all of this, is Vladimir Putin. It's obvious.
For criticizing the authorities, the FSB even locked him in a psychiatric ward. But a month later, he came out of the place with padded walls. Only 30 days of imprisonment for a critic for the Kremlin is a story that is not typical at all. This is exactly what indicates that Remeslo is acting in the interests of one of the Kremlin groups, and that's not hard to believe.
And all these statements by individual propagandists about disagreement with the Russian authorities, about dissatisfaction, with them, it seems to me, are manifestations and hints from different influence groups that something might still happen, and it won't be sometime, it could be in the near future.
Remeslo himself, naturally, will never admit to this, but the confrontation within the Kremlin, according to him, is the pure truth.
I get the impression that part of the system is already starting to work against Putin. In essence, this is similar to what happened at the end of the existence of the Soviet Union, when people hated the Communist Party and did everything so that it would cease to exist. Putin's Russia will follow the same path as the Soviet Union. Everything is being repeated.
And another interesting point. The current standoff, according to the publication's source, is very reminiscent of a similar split under Yeltsin in 1996. Back then, two camps were also clashing, the security forces and the progressive secularists. But which one Putin will support now is hard to say. For now, he's playing, you could say, against everyone. For example, the Kremlin oligarchs, representatives of the so-called progressive camp, have suffered.
The Russian elite, who, again, remember perfectly well the meeting with Putin right after the start of the full-scale war, where Putin said, "This won't affect you." More than 4 years have passed, and it is affecting them. Now we are seeing a classic violation of the social contract that Putin had, not with the population, though that's also being broken, but primarily with the oligarchs. Because when Putin came to power in late 1999 and the early 2000s, he essentially told the oligarchs, "Look, I won't interfere in your business, I won't take your money, but in exchange you won't interfere in politics."
At the same time, the security forces are also being targeted. Cases of detentions and trials of military command representatives have increased manifold. Although before this, Putin didn't touch the corrupt officials in the Ministry of Defense. And now danger looms over everyone, especially if they are the people of Sergei Shoigu. Yes, the associates of the former defense minister, now the Security Council secretary, are being hit the hardest.
I want to thank Sergei Kuzhugetovich Shoigu for everything he has done over the past years in building up the armed forces.
Exactly why Putin has turned on the friends of his pet reindeer herder is not known for sure. But rumors are circulating that this is how Putin is trying to rein in Shoigu himself. Previously, the publication Important Stories wrote that Putin is in a panic, fearing a coup is being prepared to overthrow him. Putin's paranoia has escalated so much that he even moved Kabaeva and the children from Valdai, while he himself stays holed up in a bunker.
In the presidential administration, visitors go through 2 levels of screening, including a full search by FSO officers. The FSO has significantly reduced the list of places the president regularly visits. Neither he nor his family visit their usual residences in the Moscow region and Valdai anymore. Employees working near Putin are now prohibited from using mobile phones. They are required to use devices without internet access. These employees are also prohibited from using public transportation. They travel exclusively on FSO transport. Surveillance systems have been installed in the homes of cooks, photographers, and security guards.
It's hard to say who is fueling the coup narrative more, but judging by the mood, even the rival factions within the Kremlin have something in common.
Any representative of the Russian elite, they see the story of Tsalikov, the story of Ivanov, and they start to wonder, and where are the guarantees that I won't be next? That they won't come for me? And those who might be on this list, they're starting to realize that maybe they need to act preemptively, just as Beria and others did back in the day when Stalin wanted to purge them, but in the end, they purged Stalin instead. So I'm more than certain that even within Putin's inner circle, there are people sitting there right now who are thinking that for their own safety, maybe, just maybe, Putin needs to be stopped somehow before he stops them.
And it's possible that using someone else's hands, they'll pull off, if not a Prigozhin-style mutiny, then a palace coup against Putin.
There are no signs of the Russian army learning from its mistakes. The situation clearly shows a trend toward worsening. That's exactly what Russian state propaganda is already claiming. On Solovyov's channel, they're openly saying that things aren't working out for the Russians in the Zaporizhzhia direction.
No signs of the Russian army learning from its mistakes yet, so the situation is clearly trending toward worsening, especially since the enemy clearly won't pass up the chance to restore the status quo of early 2025, pushing the Russian army back to its original positions. The armed forces of Ukraine have the opportunity to launch their own offensive toward Vasilivka.
And against this backdrop, Putin has finally started thinking about negotiations. EU leaders are preparing for potential talks with Russian ruler Vladimir Putin, as European capitals grow increasingly frustrated with the negotiations to end the war in Ukraine led by US President Donald Trump. We'll share the details in this report.
The European Union is beginning to prepare for possible negotiations with Russia to end the war against Ukraine. The Financial Times reports this, citing European officials. Frustration is growing in European capitals over the peace efforts currently led by US President Donald Trump. Against this backdrop, the EU is increasingly discussing its own role in a potential negotiation process.
Well, Ukraine is not our war. We've helped, but Ukraine is not our war. They're doing a poor job. Europe is doing a poor job in many ways with its tasks. They talk too much and do nothing. We're talking about Ukraine. They talk, but they don't do anything. And the war just goes on and on.
European Council President Antonio Costa stated that the European Union has the potential for negotiations with Putin. According to him, he is currently holding consultations with the leaders of all 27 EU countries to determine how Europe could organize a dialogue with Moscow should the right moment arise. Costa also mentioned that at the EU summit in Cyprus, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky urged European partners to be ready to make a positive contribution to future negotiations. The office of the President of Ukraine confirmed that this topic was discussed. At the same time, Brussels admits that Moscow has not yet shown a readiness for real negotiations. That's why the EU is discussing not only the format of a possible dialogue, but also ways to increase pressure on the Kremlin. Among the options is the appointment of a special EU representative who could speak with Russia on behalf of the entire bloc. This idea was previously supported by Estonian President Alar Karis and Latvian Prime Minister Evika Silina.
The European Union must also participate in these discussions. Although we are not at war with Russia directly, we have been supporting Ukraine for many years. Therefore, we must also have a voice, but as you can see, we are a bit late.
However, there is no unified position among EU countries yet. European leaders are debating who exactly should represent the Union in negotiations, when such contacts are even possible, and what terms Europe can offer Moscow. Belgian Prime Minister Bart de Wever has already publicly raised the issue of establishing a communication channel with the Kremlin. And the head of European diplomacy, Kaja Kallas, on the contrary, states that Europe should not ask Russia for negotiations, but should strive for a situation where Moscow itself will be forced to move to a real dialogue.
We must not humiliate ourselves by acting as supplicants, saying, please, we beg you to talk to us. But we must put them in such a position that they move from imitation to real negotiations.
Against the backdrop of the protracted war, there is increasing talk in Europe about the need to prepare for various scenarios, including a quick and unexpected end to the war. That is why the EU is already starting to discuss its own strategy for negotiations with the Russian Federation.
The Russians who definitely find it hard to get up from their knees are those who are currently boozing in Turkey. A Ukrainian woman filmed simply gorgeous footage of this greatness.
My God, what a piece of crap, honestly.
Brother, help me, please. Oh, what a piece of crap.
Russian crap, both of them just lying there. You're like that yourself, you hear?
I'm not Russian, thank God. I see.
Thank God, I mean, really.
I wonder if they plan to conduct a special military operation in Turkey itself for the infringement of Russians in Turkey, or is it something else? That's all for now. Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel. It's very important to us. See you later.